G'day guys, how's it going, and welcome to this episode of the Goss, where I sit down with my old man Ian Smissen and we talk about a bunch of news and current affairs items related to Australia, as well as just things that come to mind. So today we sort of give you an update about the state of COVID in Australia, COVID-19 and the pandemic. We talk about stage 3 lockdowns in regional Victoria, as well as the stage 4 lockdowns in Melbourne. And then we get onto a few other topics as well related to things like desalination in Australia, cotton and crops in Australia. And we also talk about reusable bags from supermarkets like Woolies and Coles. Probably sounds a little bit boring, but it's not too bad, I promise you. Anyway, guys, without any further ado, smack the bird. Let's get into it. Yeah, it's kind of sad, isn't it, with businesses in general. I think they generally start out as a single person's dream, their idea, their passion, and they want the business to go a certain way, that they're very concerned about customer quality. I mean, the quality for their customers, customer service, everything like that. But then it gets to a stage, I think there's a sort of watershed moment when you get a certain threshold of employees, and the original person who was trying to carry their dream through ends up becoming either the shareholder and just buggers off, or the CEO who's tens of steps away from the customer. And it's no longer necessarily about what's best for the customer or customer care, especially, unfortunately, when you have, call centers with people, whether they're in the Philippines or India or even America, the United States or Australia, if the company's here, the fact that you have these low paid people who honestly don't give a shit about...
Well, it's not even that. I mean, she was reasonable.
Yeah, but I mean,
I guess she's just running the script. And the other thing is that being in the call center, and particularly when the call center is, she's not an employee of the company, the call center is outsourced.
Exactly.
So she has no authority to make a decision on the spot.
Exactly.
And frankly, I can't be bothered sitting on the line saying, well, can I speak to your supervisor? Because the supervisor will just be the call center supervisor. There's no way that I can actually speak to a Vodafone management to whine about it.
You should probably give context for people who've, we've just started the episode running.
We just started the episode in the middle of me belly aching to one of my mobile phone providers, who shall remain nameless because I don't want to end up in court.
Well, you just mentioned them already.
Yes, I was being facetious.
Yeah.
Please take me to court. I'm not going to turn up and... so they charged me a late fee, a $15 late fee, and for the last month's payment. And I wasn't disputing that it was late. We paid it late. We just forgot. But I've been a customer of this company and their predecessors for nearly 20 years and never had a late fee. And she checked that and just said, yes, you're right. You've never had a late fee charged by us, which will be about 8 years in that. And they're still, and the late fee is automatic. As soon as if you don't pay within 4 days of the due date, the late fee goes on automatically. And I understand that. And I addressed that with her. And I just said, yes, I'm not disputing the fact that I paid late, but I'm simply saying, as a customer service, are you telling me that as a valued customer for that period of time, never having paid, never having been late, you're not willing to waive that fee? And she just said, I can't. So I said, all right, fine. You've just lost a customer. And I made that threat or statement to say, well, if you're not going to do this, I will look for an alternative provider.
Well, and I guess you're not necessarily having to go at her, but you want the message.
No, it's not her fault.
You want the message to go through her up the chain. To be like, you've just lost a customer because the systems that you currently have in place for the business are subpar. They're not what they should be.
Yeah, so it is one of those things where you just go, and look, I know many other companies, if you rang up and said, like, if you ring your insurance company and say, I've got a better deal from another insurance company, they'll immediately drop your fees.
Well, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube about that, right? I think with like Foxtel, with bills, there's all these ways of saving money where you just ring up and say,
and say, you're asking me for too much money. I'm going to pay you less. And I'll say, okay. And so, but whereas in this case, it was just, she was intransigent, and I'm blaming her. She's following a script, and she doesn't have any authority to make up her mind. So it's just irritating. The reality is that we can get a better service by going to another company anyway. The service for that company down here is crap.
Is that company Telstra?
The new company will be, yes, who I'm already a customer of, and their service is much better. Both customer service is better because you're actually talking to a Telstra employee, even though they outsource. They do have, and I've queried things before, and they immediately go, "Oh no, sorry, we made a mistake," or yes, we'll waive that.
But that's why you're paying more, right? Because
Telstra
tends to be the most premium product out there.
But
for
the technical service is much better as well. The coverage is better because we live in a black hole for.
They
coverage.
own the infrastructure. That's why, right? Whereas I think a lot of the other companies, I don't know if it's Optus and Vodafone are the examples of them renting, or is it just using other infrastructure?
They have a bit of their own in major areas, but and look, Vodafone has, I believe, and they had certainly. Years ago when I signed up, they had this agreement that if you're in a non-Vodafone area, they would immediately switch to Telstra or the best service available. Yeah. But if you can get Vodafone, you get Vodafone, even if it's crap. They don't just go, "Oh, this is a crappy service. We'll bump you up to the better one." So
but that is one of those
mobile phones.
I remember going to Rain Island when I was doing that turtle research stuff, and we were doing, I think it took 2 days to get out there from the main coast, and this is the far north Queensland, and the only people who had service out there were Telstra. And it was funny because I think I had Vodafone at the time, or it would have been Optus or something, and it dropped off within 20 minutes of being on the boat.
Drops off at 10.
Yeah, exactly. So too funny. So we should probably start with what's been happening in Victoria, right? And the state of COVID and lockdowns and everything.
There's a few COVID stories that are sort of worth talking about because for the last month it's just been boring.
But what happened? We've had a second wave in Victoria, right?
Yeah.
Which was caused... We can probably talk about the cause because I don't think we've mentioned that, and it was a funny reason, right?
Funny is one thing, but look, the funny part of it, which is the sort of the what the fuck, literally, in this case.
Pun intended.
Pun intended, yeah.
Well, I guess for the context of it, right, we had a bunch of people who were being quarantined in hotels. And
initially the hotel quarantine was for people who were in Victoria, but for whatever reason couldn't go home.
Yeah.
It was for people who were victims of domestic violence and had either were positive to COVID or had the risk of being, contracting COVID. And for people particularly working in essential services like health services who either had COVID and they needed to go somewhere, or somebody in their family or their close contacts had it and they couldn't be at home. So that service was originally set up very early on. And then we had this, obviously, the wave of people for coming back to Australia, and we forced the 14-day quarantine. And needless to say, the government rightly decided that they couldn't trust 20,000 people to all go and self-quarantine at home. Mm-hmm. So they forced them into hotels.
Was it that many people? So I didn't realise it was 20,000.
Not all at once, but over a period of months. It's been 20,000 people.
Jesus.
Apparently.
Yeah.
And that's not just international travellers, that's people coming back from interstate and so on. Anybody who had to be self-quarantined during that initial phase, this wasn't even in the second phase. Obviously, the second phase has potentially been, if not caused by, at least exacerbated by this one. And so they stuck them into hotels. And because of the larger number of people there, the normal security that the hotels offered and that the police were able to offer in those hotels just simply wasn't possible. So the government, in their infinite wisdom, and in fact, it wasn't really the government, even though they're the ones responsible, it was whoever signed off on it decided that they could go and employ private security companies to do it. And it turned out that a handful of those private security people were being offered sexual favours by residents who were in quarantine so that they could get out and go shopping.
Not the people getting... Yeah, so the security guards were effectively being bribed with sex.
The
quarantiners or quarantinees could leave and go shopping.
So all of a sudden, you've got a handful of security guards who are inevitably going to have contracted it.
I thought you just had to cough in each other's face. I didn't think sex would transmit it.
Exactly. And you've got a whole bunch of people who do have COVID who are actually out there spreading it around while they're out shopping. We then had this big second wave. Now, I suspect that the second wave would have happened anyway because there would have been these sort of undetected community things. We got fair bit of rain here. I'm not sure how much you're
Yeah, I
going to
just
pick.
heard that in the background. Well, we've
Yeah.
seen that just as of today, right? Maybe today or yesterday, that New Zealand's had a second wave, and they've been
New Zealand
close
have
to
now got
the
36 active cases,
Yeah,
having gone for 100 days without a case.
and their borders
And
are completely shut, right? There's
yeah,
no.
they had one person come in with it, they
Yeah.
believe,
Yeah.
because they're not shut to New Zealand citizens. They're shut to anybody else going to New Zealand. 36, I think, active cases now. For 100 days, they didn't have any new ones. They obviously had the ones that they knew about and were getting over from the previous phase. But
So what did you make though of Dan Andrews's reaction to this second wave? Because I mean, he's received quite a bit of criticism of not acting tough enough straight away, but at the same time, we had a lot of people.
He's received an equal amount of criticism for the action he has taken.
Exactly.
So this is we're going to shoot you in the foot. You choose.
What is it, the catch-22 or the fucked if you do, fucked if you don't?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, and that's the game I hate watching on TV, right? Because even if Dan Andrews has been doing, a suboptimal job with hindsight, being 2020, and us able to look back a month or two ago and say, oh, you should have done this and this and this. The guy's been working his ass off. I don't think he's had a day off,
I don't think
right?
he's had any
Probably
sleep in 6 months.
year. Yeah.
No, because it started off with the year started off in Victoria anyway. Started off with bushfires in December and January.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
And then February COVID hit. So he hasn't had a day off, including weekends. In that time, he's been doing daily press conferences for 6 months.
Yeah.
7 months now.
And so the numbers have gone up. They went up to, I think, a peak of something like
750 in a day,
and
new cases in a day.
For a lot of people listening in other countries, that probably won't seem like very
Doesn't
much.
sound like, but when you came from none,
It wasn't
And
none
you've
to
got-
700, but it went pretty quickly within a few weeks.
over a month, it went from sort of none or at least single digit figures to 700. But we're back down to what was today,
280 or something like that. Yeah.
278. Yeah, I've got it open here.
Yeah.
And now, of course, it's not just the number of new infections, but it's that delayed response to that is the number of deaths we're getting.
Yeah. So the cases are dropping, but the deaths are increasing.
Yeah, I didn't see. We had 8 deaths, I think, today or in the last 24 hours, which is less than in the past. But one person dying is too many.
Well, and a big
most
issue
of
there
those
was
are from elderly people who have come from aged care centres.
because it got into the aged care centres.
Got into 4 or 5 major aged care centres, and runs rampant, of course, as soon as you get into that environment. And it's opened up a whole lot of questions about the management of aged care as well.
They must be, I would love to be a fly on the wall with the CEOs of some of those companies at the moment, because whilst they're probably panicking in terms of what it looks like for their companies externally and like, oh, this is bad press.
Yeah.
At the same time, they're having a wildfire go through and get rid of all these, free up a lot of space for new people to buy their way in. Right, because the thing with aged care in Australia is that you pay a certain amount of money, but you don't get to keep anything after the person.
Buy you, basically.
But only whilst you're alive, right? And the money stays with the company.
No, they sell it back, but they sell it back at a price that they want to.
Exactly.
It's one of the great government-sponsored commercial rorts of all time. So
yeah.
You pay us $500,000 to live in this room, and then when you die or choose to leave, we'll buy it back from you at a price that we determine.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's only worth 20 grand.
And then they resell it again straight away.
So, I know. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, we've been living with that, and I guess so a few months ago, maybe 2 months ago, Dan Andrews was bringing in pretty stricter lockdown measures for just Melbourne, but then the cases started getting into regional Victoria, and so we've had stage 4 lockdown in Melbourne. It was stage 3 and then went to 4, and now regional Victoria is stage 3, isn't it? 3. Where we are. And so we're
on 3.1 really. We've sort of bumped it up a little bit from 3.
It's a bit of overkill, I feel, but at the same time, it's probably going to do the job.
Yeah, well, exactly. And it's a bit of overkill, but the trouble is you can't underkill it because, and this is something that we talked about when the restrictions went off after phase 1. And that is when they when the government puts in a regulation, which is actually law at the time, that says, you can't go out of your house except for these 4 reasons. Most people do the right thing. As soon as they remove that and they say, we suggest that you don't go out of your house, other than for these 4 reasons, people go, whoa, we don't care what you suggest. And then trying to bring it back in again is much harder. I think they should have left it on in the first place.
Yeah.
I don't think it was a matter of going hard in the second phase. I think the second phase was, partly caused by idiots, and most of this is caused by idiots. But it was that general public lessening of the severity of the virus in people's minds. We never got over it. All we did was avoid it. In phase 1, we just avoided it by saying, well, don't go out, don't get infected. It wasn't that the virus wasn't there. It was still in a large number of people. And all of a sudden you had most people just going, even sensible people go, oh, we don't need to worry about this anymore.
Well, and I even found myself thinking at times, I leave the house and I'm thinking, why do I need to have a mask? I don't have COVID. And then I catch myself saying to myself, how do you know?
Yeah,
how do you know you don't
That's
have
the thing, is that nobody knows whether they have COVID virus or not.
Exactly, for the first week or so.
Nobody knows because it takes 48 hours to be detected. So, even if you get a test now, if we went out and got a test now and the test comes back negative in 2 days, that doesn't mean that in 2 days' time I'm not negative. I don't have it because I could have contracted it in the last 2 days. So it's this. You're constantly circling around people's lack of trust in data and lack of understanding of basic medical epidemiology, and you combine that with inconvenience. And if somebody's, I hesitate to say ignorant, but naive about the way these things operate, but is also inconvenienced by the actions that have been taken by governments and health boards and so on to try and prevent it, then what are they going to do? They're going to say, I don't believe you, so I'll do what I like.
Well, and that's the issue with what's going on in America, right? Because they ironically, their system, the way that it's set up to sort of put freedoms and individual responsibility,
freedom to infect people,
has kind of, come back to haunt them because, one, I think the states kind of have a lot more control and they're the ones who decide what happens and what doesn't happen with lockdowns or masks or anything like that. And then I think, secondly, they kind of implemented it too little too late and kind of half-assed it, right? So that the average person was sort of somewhat fatigued with the idea of being forced to wear masks or having lockdown. So
and then they took them off very quickly.
Yeah, and then when it did hit, people are like, well, I'm not doing it now. And so it became even worse than if they had just gone hard and fast at the beginning, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So.
I wanted to ask you what you thought of the event with I think they were Queenslanders, right? Those young girls who, I think, so to give full context, I believe they were obviously of African descent, potentially immigrants themselves, but had probably been here a long time in Australia. And they had been to Melbourne, made their way back to Queensland when the borders were closed because they ended up lying about where they'd been, the fact that they'd been in Melbourne.
Yes, they were entitled, as Queensland residents, they were entitled to go back to Queensland, but they lied about being in Victoria.
So that they didn't have to go into quarantine.
Exactly.
And they did.
And they went out partying.
Yeah. So the 3 of them, I think, ended up going to all of these different restaurants and cafes. And, in and of itself, that was bad enough. But the thing that got me was the fact that they actually destroyed their phones and did all this.
So they couldn't be traced.
Yeah. So that the police couldn't see where they'd been or anything like that.
Oh, they knew. And
so I was watching I think it was a current affair had a thing that popped up in YouTube and I was like, all right, I'll watch this. And then I saw Media Watch's breakdown of it. And a current affairs was interesting. I mean, a current affairs is a current affair, right? So they're kind of, I don't know how you would describe them. They're kind of sensationalist, witch hunters in Australia. Sometimes the stories are good, but quite often they're just like, this guy didn't pay his bills for 3 months, and we're going to make it a feature story and shame him nationally, across the entire nation.
Yeah, exactly.
But so they went after these 2 girls because it was obviously a story that people were going to rage up about. And the thing that I found interesting was that when they interviewed the girl's brother on the phone, he went nuts abusing them and just being like, if they weren't African, you wouldn't do anything, you effing idiot, blah, blah, blah. It's all about race. It's all about race. And, it's not their fault and you're racist.
Yeah, that becomes really irritating when people pull a race card, whereas the actual reason is the idiot card.
Well, and that's what I wanted to bring up.
You don't get a free pass because you're a minority on being an idiot.
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing that annoyed me, because it feels like you're weaponizing the minority card in order to get out of jail free.
Yeah. Of course, it's a commonly done thing.
And the weird thing, though, was that Media Watch was kind of bringing it up, because I think the thing that was somewhat unfair from my perspective was that they not only named and shamed them, outright, but also put their photos like on the front covers of all these different newspapers.
Yeah.
I don't know how much the different quote unquote race had to do with doing that. But Media Watch was saying, it was somewhat, racially motivated in that they knew the story would sell more because these people were of a different race.
That is possible. I think the other thing too, though, is that these girls were over 18 years of age. And so there's nothing illegal about a media thing putting photographs up of them to report. They
wouldn't have done it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. To report on the fact that they had been charged with a crime.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. And I think it's unreasonable that we do that in Australia, that somebody is charged with a crime and media outlets are allowed to put their images up and report on it and name them before they've actually been found guilty. Yeah. Now, there's no question that these girls were guilty. I don't think they're going to go to court and say we didn't do it, but that's not the point. The point is, we presume innocence, and yet we're allowed to effectively try people by media within the law. So,
unless they're George Pell, where they close down the media and they don't allow anyone to talk about it. Anyway, but the thing that sort of got me was the fact that everyone seemed to jump on the bandwagon of this being a racial thing and forget the fact that we have been doing exactly the same thing with a bunch of other quote-unquote white Australian women recently, like the Karen thing that's come up with these women not wearing masks and going to Bunnings and then it's my right to not wear a mask, and they film themselves, put it online about how good they are, not wearing, flaunting their refusal to adhere to the rules, and then they get publicly shamed and everything. And also there was that woman who was trying to get, I think, from Victoria to New South Wales, right? And she lied and then videotaped herself
and then put it up on social media going, hey, I got through.
And then got fined, got messed up, and that was all over the news, right? They were just like, massive
and that was
comeuppance.
I don't have a problem with media reporting on things when it has been self-reported. If somebody goes on there and on social media and films themselves doing something wrong and then boasts about it, then you've provided your own evidence. You suck it up.
Yeah, I know, it's hard to feel sorry for those people. But I don't know. It was weird though that they were calling in social media for the young African girls, girls of African descent who went to Queensland to get jail time, already, and everyone was like already weighing in on it. I don't know, again, how much that was to do with race, but the fact that they had manipulated things and put the state at risk, because Queensland had none. But,
and again, that's just trial by media. And,
exactly.
And the reality is that it's sensationalism. It's... Why do we need to know? Why do we need to see these girls' photographs? Why do we need to know their names? They have been arrested. That's all they need to be reported on, is that 2 or 3 people did this, they've been arrested. And in fact, you question, well, do they even need to report on that? We get this sort of media sensationalism, and the story got far more legs than it actually deserved because they were attractive young women doing the wrong thing. And if it had been 2 50-year-old white men, nobody would have even taken any notice.
It is weird, right?
That's not a race thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
This is more interesting because it's cute young women.
The media, you wonder where it's going to go in the future, because at the moment they seem to only have those sorts of extremes that is propping them up, right? They have to find ways of making stories as outlandish as possible and either getting outrage or surprise or shock out of their audience in order to get clicks and views. And you wonder how sustainable that is in the long term.
No. Well, I don't think it is, and that's the challenge, because people just get bored of it, and where a lot of that is designed for television. Radio stories are very hard to sensationalise because you can't do anything visual. Newspaper, yes, you can have a photograph, but mostly it's about the quality of the reporting and the wording that they put around it. Whereas television, it's all about flashing images up on screen and telling sensational stories around it. And it just becomes tedious.
Well, there was one of those that was shown recently about, I'm not sure if it was a Current Affair or one of these other shows, where they were shown to be using stock footage from the outbreak in Italy and saying that it was Melbourne.
Yeah.
As the hospitals were under so much stress, and when it was broken down by Media Watch, they were like, what are you doing?
And that's the problem with television. It's almost like we have to have an image on. You can't have... Back in my day, when I was a youngster, television news was 90% looking at a talking head. It was the newsreader who was just reading the news to you, and then every now and then they had a bit of footage to go with it, or they might have had a photograph of the event or the person they were talking about that they'd have as a little inset on the screen. But now it's just like we'll have the person, the newsreader talking over something, or a reporter in the field. That's the other thing that drives me nuts. We've got an AFL footballer has been found drink driving, and so we send a reporter out to stand in front of AFL House in Melbourne and tell the story. I don't give a shit where he is. Why can't we just have this person in the studio?
I guess does it lend more credence to the person and their reporting?
Standing in front of a building in Melbourne, rather than it'd be different if he was interviewing somebody in AFL House.
Well, it seems like they're closer to the story, I would imagine.
I know, but it's sort of, how dumb do you think people are? We're sitting there watching this. We know that he's just reading the news. We don't need him standing out there. So, it just drives me nuts. Look, I think we are going to get to a point where, and look, there was discussion of it, ironically, on Commercial News the other night, where they were basically saying themselves that most commercial TV stations now can't afford to run the news because they're just not getting enough advertising through television at all.
Yeah.
And the news is one of those things where people will watch the news. And that's a high rating show. And once that starts to drop off.
That was the first half of this episode of The Goss. If you would like to continue watching or continue listening to this episode, make sure that you sign up for the premium podcast or academy memberships at aussieenglish.com.au, where you will get full access to these entire episodes of this series and much, much more. You can go check that out using the links below, or just go to aussieenglish.com.au. Once again, thank you so much for joining me, mate, and I will see you next time. Peace.